This story is titled, Daughter-in-Law Blocked Me from My Grandkid. So, I cut them out of my will, and now my son is begging me to reconsider. Hey people, I don't usually post here, but I need some outside opinions because my family is literally losing their minds at me. Let me set the scene for you. I'm 64, retired, and living in a quiet house that feels way too big for just me. My wife Clara passed away 5 years ago, and since then, it's been just me and my bike. Riding isn't just a hobby, it's my escape. When I'm out on the road, it's like the noise in my head quiets down. There's no loneliness, no regrets, no wondering if I could have done more for Clara before she passed. That bike saved me in more ways than I can count. Now, my family situation? It's complicated. My son Eric and I don't have the best relationship. We're polite to each other, but there's always been this unspoken tension between us. He's a planner, a straight-laced by-the-book kind of guy. I'm not. I've always been a little rough around the edges. Clara used to joke that I was the wild card of the family. Eric never liked that about me, even as a kid. I think he resented how much Clara and I balanced each other out. When she was around, she'd smooth things over between us. But now, it's like we're both waiting for the other to screw up. And then there's Megan, my daughter-in-law. I don't think Megan's ever liked me. She's polite enough on the surface, but there's always been this underlying judgment. Like she's waiting for me to mess up so she can say, I told you so. Megan's the type who plans everything to the minute. Vacations, meals, even how long Noah, my grandson, gets to play outside. She's a good mom, don't get me wrong, but she's intense. Noah, though, that kid is the best thing in my life. He's 11, full of energy, and always up for an adventure. He worships my bike. Every time they visit, he makes a beeline for the garage, running his hands over the chrome and pretending to rev the engine. When can I ride with you, Grandpa? He'd ask, his eyes wide with excitement. And every time I'd laugh and say, when your dad says it's okay. It was our little routine, and honestly, it always made my day. Then came that weekend in January. They'd come over for a late holiday visit, and as usual, Noah was in the garage before they even got their coats off. Grandpa, can we ride today? Please? He begged, bouncing on his toes. I glanced at Eric, expecting the usual shutdown. To my surprise, he shrugged. Fine, just don't go far and be careful. I couldn't believe it. After years of waiting, I was finally going to take Noah for his first ride. Megan didn't say anything, but the look on her face said it all. Tight-lipped, arms crossed, the classic, I don't approve, but I'm not going to fight this battle right now stance. I didn't care. For once, I wasn't going to let her ruin the moment. Now, I wasn't about to mess this up. I'd actually bought Noah his own helmet and gloves a while back, just in case this day ever came. I got him all geared up, making sure everything fit perfectly. I went over the basics. How to sit, where to hold on, why he shouldn't move around too much. He listened intently, nodding like this was the most important lesson of his life. You ready, kiddo? I asked, strapping on my own helmet. Ready, he said, his grin so big it practically split his face in half. The ride was incredible. We didn't go far, just a few miles to grab some ice cream and back. Noah laughed the whole time, his arms tight around my waist. This is the best day ever! He yelled over the sound of the engine, and I felt a warmth in my chest I hadn't felt in years. For a moment, it was just me and my grandson, sharing something no one could take away from us. And then it all went to hell. Crazy how life changes in just a glance. We were stopped at a red light on the way back, chatting about what kind of ice cream we'd get next time. I heard the tires screech before I felt the impact. The bike jolted beneath me, and before I could react, a car slammed into the back of my bike. The impact jolted me forward, but I managed to stay upright. Noah wasn't so lucky. He tumbled off and hit the pavement hard. The sound of him hitting the pavement, a mix of a thud and a cry, froze my heart. I jumped off the bike and ran to him, my heart pounding. He was pale, clutching his arm, which was bent at an angle that made my stomach churn. It hurts, he whimpered, tears streaming down his face. I tried to stay calm. I've got you, buddy, I said, scooping him up as gently as I could. The driver who hit us was babbling something about not seeing the light, but I didn't even look at him. My only focus was Noah. A woman in a minivan pulled over and offered to drive us to the hospital. I didn't hesitate. I climbed in with Noah in my arms, whispering reassurances I wasn't sure I believed. The ride to the hospital felt like it took hours, even though it was only 10 minutes. My mind raced the whole way. What if he needed surgery? What if this was worse than it looked? And the guilt. God, the guilt. I'd been so careful, but maybe I shouldn't have taken him out at all. When we got to the hospital, the nurses rushed Noah into the ER. I gave them all the information I could and paced the waiting room like a madman. That's when Eric and Megan showed up. "What happened?" Megan shouted, her voice sharp enough to cut through the chaos. "A car hit us," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It wasn't—" She cut me off. "This is why I didn't want him riding with you." Eric didn't say much. He just sat down, his head in his hands, while Megan kept going, throwing accusation after accusation, basically disrespecting me in all ways in front of everyone in the hospital, but I didn't have the energy to argue. I just kept thinking about Noah, wondering if he was okay. When the doctor finally came out, he told us Noah had a clean break in his arm. "He'll need a cast for 6 weeks, but he'll make a full recovery," he said. Relief flooded through me, but Megan didn't let up. "I told you this would happen," she hissed to Eric as they followed the doctor to see Noah, leaving me alone in the waiting room. I sat there, staring at the tiled floor, feeling a mix of anger, guilt, and sadness I couldn't shake. That night, when we all got back to my house, things exploded. We got back from the hospital. The house was quiet except for the occasional shuffle of Noah trying to get comfortable with his new cast. I'd spent hours in that waiting room, trying to piece together what I could have done differently, but no matter how much I turned it over in my head, the answer was always the same. It wasn't my fault. I'd been careful. I'd done everything right. And yet, here we were. I sat at the kitchen table with a half-empty mug of coffee, staring at the clock on the microwave. The minutes seemed to drag. I could hear Eric and Megan whispering upstairs, their voices muffled but sharp. They were probably checking on Noah, making sure he was okay after the ordeal. It didn't bother me that they were with him. He needed them. What got to me was the way they'd looked at me at the hospital, like I was a stranger. Or worse, like I was the enemy. Finally, I heard the stairs creak. Eric came down first, his face tight, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs, glancing at me briefly before heading to the fridge. He grabbed a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, staring at the floor. "We need to talk," I said, breaking the silence. My voice was low, careful. He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, his jaw clenched, taking slow sips from his mug. Finally, he sighed. "Not tonight, Dad." "Night. When then?" I asked, my frustration creeping into my voice. "We can't just ignore this, Eric. We need to clear the air." He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw it. The anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Clear the air? There's nothing to clear. You took my kid out on that bike, and now he's hurt. Do you think I wanted this to happen?" I shot back. "Do you think I wasn't careful? I've been riding for 40 years, Eric. I know what I'm doing." He shook his head, his eyes narrowing. "It doesn't matter how careful you were. The fact is, you shouldn't have taken him out in the first place." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Megan came down the stairs. Her arms were crossed, her face tight. She wasn't the kind of person who let things simmer. She came out swinging. "Eric's right," she said, her voice cold and clipped. "You never should have taken Noah on that bike. This is exactly what we were worried about, and now look at him." "I had your permission," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "Eric said it was okay, and you didn't say a word." "I didn't stop it because I knew it wouldn't matter," she snapped. "You've always done whatever you wanted, and now my son is paying for it." That stung. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. I did everything I could to keep him safe. The car hit us. That wasn't my fault. It doesn't matter whose fault it was. Megan shot back, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You were reckless, and now Noah's the one who's hurt." I looked at Eric, hoping he'd step in, but he just stood there, staring at the floor. The silence felt like a betrayal. "You're really just going to let her talk to me like that?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. Eric finally looked up, but his expression was unreadable. "She's not wrong," he said quietly. Something in me snapped. "Not wrong? Eric, I've done nothing but try to do right by you and your family. I've been careful. I've respected your boundaries. And this is how you repay me?" "Dad, just stop," Eric said. "No, his voice I don't," tired, I said. "You don't get it. Up. Because instead of trying to have an actual conversation, you're both treating me like I'm some kind of villain. I'm your father, Eric. You don't talk to me like this." Megan stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you put our son in danger." Eric grabbed her arm gently, pulling her back. "That's enough," he said, his voice firm. But it wasn't enough. Not for me. I stared at both of them, feeling a mix of anger and sadness I couldn't even begin to process. You know what? Maybe I made a mistake taking him out, but I didn't make a mistake caring about him, and I sure as hell didn't make a mistake doing everything I could to protect him. You want to blame me? Fine. But don't you dare act like I was reckless. Eric didn't respond. He just turned and walked toward the stairs. Megan followed him, but not before throwing one last glare over her shoulder. We'll be leaving in the morning, she said coolly. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed at the kitchen table, staring at the mug in front of me until the early morning. I heard the soft thud of footsteps upstairs as they packed their bags, followed by the muffled sounds of Noah asking where they were going. When they finally came downstairs, Megan didn't say a word. She just grabbed Noah's coat and helped him into it. Eric lingered near the door, his hands shoved deep into his pockets again. Dad, he said finally, his voice low. This isn't easy for us, but we need some space. I nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in my throat. Fine. Take your space. But don't expect me to just forget about this. He didn't respond. Instead, he opened the door and stepped outside, Megan and Noah following close behind. Noah turned back for a second, his big brown eyes meeting mine. Bye, Grandpa, he said softly, his voice barely audible. Bye, buddy, I managed to say, forcing a smile I didn't feel. And then they were gone. I stood in the doorway, watching their car disappear down the street. The house felt impossibly quiet. For the first time since Clara passed, I truly felt alone. That was the beginning of the end. I didn't know it at the time, but things were about to get worse. Much worse. I wandered aimlessly in the house, picking up dishes that didn't need washing, fiddling with tools in the garage that didn't need fixing. The bike sat there, still scuffed from the accident, a grim reminder of how everything had gone so wrong. My grandson, my buddy, was hurt, and no one wanted to hear that I'd done everything I could. All Eric and Megan saw was someone to blame, and that someone was me. A few days later, I decided to call my oldest friend, Rick. He's the guy who's been in my life longer than anyone except Clara. We met in high school, bonded over a shared love of fixing up old cars and motorcycles. If there's anyone who understands me, it's Rick. Hey, man, he said when he picked up, his voice rough from years of smoking. What's going on? You sound like you've been chewing gravel. I told him everything. The ride, the accident, the hospital, and the way Eric and Megan had frozen me out. By the end of it, I could barely talk. Rick was quiet for a moment, then let out a long sigh. Look, he said, you're beating yourself up over something you couldn't control. That's not on you. You did right by that kid, and anyone with half a brain could see that. Yeah, well, Eric and Megan don't seem to think so, I muttered. They're acting like I'm the one who broke his arm. Eric's always been a hard ass, Rick said. He's like a damn pressure cooker. Clara used to keep the lid on him, but now that she's gone, he trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. Yeah, I said softly, thinking about Clara. She would have known how to handle this. She'd have talked to Eric, calmed Megan down, and somehow made everything okay again. Without her, it felt like the whole family was coming apart at the seams. The following weeks were tough. I tried calling Eric a few times, but every call went straight to voicemail. I left messages, calm ones, apologetic ones, even angry ones, but nothing worked. Megan didn't answer her phone either, and I didn't have the nerve to call their house line, worried she might pick up and slam the phone down the moment she heard my voice. Rick, bless his grumpy old soul, kept checking in on me. You need to get out of that damn house, he'd say. Sitting around staring at the walls isn't going to fix anything. One Saturday, he dragged me to a motorcycle meetup at a diner just outside of town. I wasn't in the mood, but Rick has this way of not taking no for an answer. We pulled into the lot, and I immediately felt a little lighter. It was like stepping into a familiar rhythm. Rick introduced me to a few people I didn't know, including a woman named Linda. She was probably in her late 50s, with sharp eyes and a laugh that sounded like it came from deep in her chest. She'd been riding since she was a teenager, and had a knack for cutting through the bullshit. At one point, Rick wandered off, and I ended up sitting with Linda at one of the diner's outdoor tables. She asked me about my bike, and the conversation naturally turned to why it was banged up. I gave her the short version of the story, but even that felt like unloading a ton of bricks. You're carrying a lot of guilt for something that wasn't your fault, she said after I finished. Yeah, well, try telling my son that, I replied, fiddling with the handle of my coffee mug. She tilted her head, studying me like she was trying to figure out a puzzle. You said you did everything right? The safety gear, the short ride, all of it? Yeah, I said. Then what else could you have done? She asked, leaning forward slightly. Seriously, what's the alternative here? Never letting him on the bike? Never sharing something you love with him? That's not living. That's just fear talking. I didn't say anything for a moment, just nodded. She was right. I'd been careful. I'd been responsible. And I'd given Noah a memory he'd probably hold on to for the rest of his life, accident or no accident. But Eric and Megan didn't see it that way. They were too wrapped up in their anger to see anything else. A few weeks later, I decided to visit Eric's house. I hadn't heard from him, and I was tired of waiting for a call that wasn't coming. Rick told me I was crazy. "They're not going to open the door, man. You're just setting yourself up for more crap," he said. But I had to try. When I got there, the house looked the same as always. Neat, orderly, the kind of place where everything has its place. I stood on the porch for a moment, steeling myself before ringing the bell. It took a minute, but eventually Megan opened the door. Her face hardened the moment she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice flat. "I came to talk to Eric," I said. "He doesn't want to talk to you," she replied, starting to close the door. I put my hand on the frame, not to stop her, just to keep the conversation going. "Megan, please, I need to fix this. I need to talk to my son." She sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "It's not that simple," she said. "Noah's still recovering, and Eric's not ready to forgive you." "Forgive me for what?" I asked, my voice cracking. "For loving my grandson? For doing everything I could to keep him safe?" Megan didn't respond. She just stared at me for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she shook her head. "This was a mistake," she said quietly, and closed the door. I stood there on the porch, staring at the wood grain. Rick was waiting for me when I got home. He took one look at my face and didn't even need to ask what happened. "Come on," he said. "You've got people who care about you, even if your kid can't see it right now." I nodded, but the truth was, I felt completely alone. Eric had shut me out. Megan had slammed the door in my face, and Noah, God, I missed that kid. Linda's words came back to me as I sat there in the garage that night, staring at my bike. "You're carrying a lot of guilt for something that wasn't your fault." She was right, but knowing it didn't make it hurt any less. A couple of months passed, and I still hadn't heard a word from Eric or Megan. I'd left messages, calm ones, angry ones, even one where I just said, "Call me back so we can sort this out." None of them got a response. At some point, I stopped expecting my phone to ring and just started focusing on other things, or at least trying to. Then, November rolled around, and I remembered Noah's birthday was coming up. He'd be turning 12. I hadn't seen him or heard his voice in months, and the thought of letting the day go by without doing anything didn't sit right with me. He was still my grandson, no matter how much Megan wanted to keep us apart. I decided to send him a gift. I didn't overthink it. I knew exactly what he'd want. Noah had been talking about this big Lego pirate ship set for months. He'd shown me pictures of it on his mom's phone the last time they visited, going on and on about how it had cannons and a little treasure chest. It was perfect. I bought it, wrapped it up, and wrote a note to go with it. "Happy birthday, Noah. I hope you have a great day. I miss you so much and can't wait to see you again. Love, Grandpa." I mailed it out a week before his birthday, hoping it would at least remind him that I hadn't forgotten about him. Maybe it would even get Eric to pick up the phone. A few days after his birthday, my phone rang. When I saw Eric's name on the screen, I froze. I wasn't sure if I should feel excited or brace myself for whatever was coming. But then I thought about Noah, and my intuition told me this might be the first step toward making things right. I picked it up. "Eric?" "Dad," he said, his tone flat. "Noah wants to talk to you." My heart skipped. I hadn't heard Noah's voice in so long, and I missed him like crazy. "Really?" I asked, trying not to sound too eager. "Put him on." There was some rustling on the other end of the line, and then I heard Noah. But what came out of his mouth wasn't what I expected. "I hate you," he said, his voice cold and deliberate. "Go fuck off, old man." The call ended before I could say a word. I just sat there, staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. That wasn't my grandson. At least, not the one I knew. Was he angry at me? Or had Eric and Megan told him to say that? Either way, it hit me hard. A week later, a package arrived at my door. It was big, but when I saw the return address, my stomach sank. It was from Eric. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a peace offering, a way of saying, "Let's start over." I tore it open, my hands shaking. Inside was the Lego set I'd sent Noah, only it wasn't the way I'd sent it. The box was ripped open, the pieces smashed into a plastic bag like garbage. Taped to the bag was a note. Period. "Don't contact us again." I held the bag in my hands, staring at the note, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. It wasn't just a rejection. It was a message, loud and clear. They didn't want me in Noah's life anymore. Rick came by later that day, catching me as I was dumping the ruined Lego set into the trash. He raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions, just grabbed water from my fridge and sat down at the table. After a few minutes, I told him what happened, about the phone call, the package, the note. By the time I finished, Rick looked like he was ready to storm over to Eric's house himself. "That's some next-level bullswat," he said, shaking his head. "I don't know how you're keeping it together, man. I'd have lost it by now." "What's the point?" I said, leaning back in my chair. "Eric won't listen. Megan's got him wrapped around her finger. And Noah? I don't even know if he wants to see me anymore." Rick slammed his glass down on the table. "Of course he wants to see you. He's a kid, for God's sake. He's just doing what his parents tell him to do. Doesn't mean he doesn't miss you." I wanted to believe him, but the phone call kept playing in my head. Noah's voice, sharp and cold, telling me to fuck off. I'd never heard him like that before, and I didn't know if I'd ever hear him any other way again. By December, I was done being the punching bag, the smashed Lego set, Noah's cold words on the phone, and the utter silence from Eric. It all built into a fire that couldn't be ignored anymore. They'd pushed me to the edge, and now it was time to show them I wasn't going to just roll over and let them rewrite my place in Noah's life, or the family's legacy. I wasn't going to lash out recklessly. That's not how you win a fight like this. You plan, you calculate, and then you make your move. The first step was the will. After everything that had happened, I'd already updated it to cut out Eric and Megan entirely, leaving everything, my savings, my house, and my life insurance, to charities that would actually appreciate it. The only exception was Noah. I'd set aside $50,000 for his college fund, but with strict conditions. He'd only get it if he enrolled in college, and only when he turned 21. That way, Megan and Eric couldn't touch it. But now, I realized that wasn't enough. I needed to make sure they couldn't challenge the will or worm their way back in, especially Megan. So I called Thomas, my lawyer, and asked him to add one more clause. If Eric or Megan ever contested the will, the $50,000 for Noah would be forfeited entirely. Thomas, a no-nonsense guy who'd been in my corner for years, didn't even blink. "I'll have it drafted and ready to sign by the end of the week," he said. Once the will was finalized, I sent Eric and Megan a copy along with a short, pointed note. "You've made it clear you don't want me in your lives. This is my response. Consider it final." The first call came from Megan, of course. She didn't waste any time with pleasantries. "What the hell is this?" she snapped, her voice dripping with fury. "You're cutting us out? Using Noah to get back at us? Do you have any idea how petty this is?" "This isn't about getting back at anyone," I said calmly. "This is about protecting myself. You've made it clear I'm not welcome in your family. I'm just making sure that if I'm not part of Noah's life, you don't get to profit from mine." "That's not fair," she hissed. "Noah is still your grandson." "Yes, he is," I said, my voice steady. "And that's why I've made sure he'll have something for his future. But you and Eric, you've burned that bridge." Megan fell silent for a moment, but I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Finally, she said, "You're punishing us for protecting our son." "No, Megan," I said, my patience wearing thin. "I'm protecting myself from people who've done nothing but try to erase me from his life. You don't get to have it both ways." She hung up after that. This is what happened recently. I don't know if they'll ever try to make things right, but honestly, I don't think Megan would stay silent for long. She likes money too much to let this slide. An apology wouldn't fix anything after all they've done. But if something stirs up, I'll keep you updated. Stay tuned. Final update. All right, so here's what went down. A week after I sent Eric and Megan the updated will with that clause, you know, the one where they lose Noah's college fund if they try to contest it, Megan showed up at my house. No call, no text, just knocked on the door like she owned the place. When I opened it, there she was, standing on my porch with this forced, overly sweet smile. The kind of smile that screams, "I need something, but I don't want to say it outright." "Can we talk?" she asked. Her tone so measured it felt like she'd rehearsed it in the car. I crossed my arms and gave her my best unimpressed look. "Depends on what you want to talk about." She didn't wait for an invitation, just stepped right inside and started looking around my house like she was appraising it. "Look," she said, folding her hands in front of her like she was delivering a TED Talk. "I think we've all been under a lot of stress. The accident, Noah's recovery, the misunderstandings. Maybe we can find a way to move past all this." "Move past it," I said, raising an eyebrow. "Is that what you're calling it now?" Her smile twitched for a second. Just a second, but she recovered quickly. We're still family, she said, her voice softening. Noah misses you. Eric misses you. And I know you miss them too. I leaned against the wall, watching her carefully. She wasn't here to reconcile. This wasn't about family or Noah. This was about the will. This wouldn't have anything to do with the will, would it? I asked, tilting my head. Her face froze for half a second before she slapped that fake smile back on. Of course not, she said, laughing a little like it was absurd. I just think it's time we put this behind us. For Noah's sake. It was almost funny how obvious she was. Megan wasn't here to make peace. She was here because she'd realized the money was slipping out of her grasp. She wanted back in, but not because she cared about me or even about Noah having his grandpa. No, this was pure damage control. I decided to call her bluff. All right, I said, straightening up. If you really want to reconcile, let's talk. But I have a few conditions. Her smile brightened, like she thought she'd won, and I almost felt bad for what was coming next. Almost. For the next hour, I laid it all out. I told her that if she and Eric wanted to be back in my life, it couldn't be on their terms alone. It would mean letting me see Noah regularly, without any of their micromanaging or petty restrictions. It would mean acknowledging that I wasn't the villain in this story. And most importantly, it would mean apologizing. Not just to me, but for the way they dragged Noah into their mess. Megan's face darkened with every condition, and by the time I finished, she was clutching her purse like it was a stress ball. She didn't argue, though. Not outright. Instead, she stood up, her voice icy but controlled. I'll talk to Eric, she said, like she was doing me a favor. Good, I replied, walking her to the door. But let me be clear, Megan. This isn't about the money. It's about respect. If you can't give me that, we have nothing to talk about. She didn't say another word, just turned and walked out. A week later, Eric showed up at my house, alone. He looked tired, like Megan had been on his case nonstop since our last conversation. When I opened the door, he didn't even bother with small talk. Dad, he said, his voice quieter than usual. Can we talk? I stepped aside and let him in. He didn't sit down, just paced the living room like he was working up the nerve to say something important. Finally, he stopped and turned to face me. Why did you change the will? He asked, his tone more confused than angry. Because you left me no choice, I said. You and Megan shut me out completely. You let her treat me like I'm nothing, and you let Noah think I don't care about him. This was the only way I could make sure I wasn't erased from his life. Eric flinched a little at my words, but he didn't argue. Instead, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. I screwed up, he admitted. When Noah got hurt, I panicked. Megan was furious, and I guess I went along with it because it was easier than admitting I made a mistake. Hearing him say that felt like a weight lifting off my chest. For months, I'd thought Megan was pulling all the strings, but now it was clear Eric had been hiding behind her anger because he couldn't face his own guilt. You did make a mistake, I said, my voice firm but not unkind. But shutting me out wasn't the way to fix it. Noah needs all of us, Eric. And if you keep letting Megan call the shots, you're going to lose more than just me. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was a start. As for Megan, she's been quiet since then, which is fine by me. Maybe she realized she couldn't manipulate me anymore. Or maybe she's still figuring out her next move. Either way, I'm not worried. I've made my point, and I've made sure that no matter what happens, Noah will always know who his grandfather is.